My own daughters said my job was filth. He comes home smelling like a sewer half the time. They laughed. So I took away their entire world and watched them crumble. I'm Frank, 52, a man who has spent his life working with his hands. And I cut my daughters off forever after they mocked me for being just a plumber who gets his hands in people's filth. It's a strange thing to summarize the end of your family in a single sentence, but the truth is often simple and brutal. The break wasn't a crack that suddenly appeared. It was the final, shattering collapse of a foundation that had been eroding for years. A decay I had chosen to ignore for the sake of a memory and a promise. My wife Maria was the light of our lives. When she passed away from a sudden illness 10 years ago, that light went out, and I was left blinking in the darkness with 2 young girls to raise. Isabella was 14, and Olivia was 11. In my grief, I made a silent vow to her memory that I would give our daughters everything. I wanted them to have a life she would have been proud of, a life filled with opportunities and comforts I never had growing up. He was a good man, but we never had much. When he passed a business, Valentine & Son Plumbing, onto me it was solid but small. I worked tirelessly to build it. I spent weekends on emergency calls, nights doing paperwork, and holidays fixing burst pipes for frantic families. Every dollar I earned, every ounce of sweat I poured into that business was for my girls. And I succeeded. The business grew into one of the most respected in the city. We had a fleet of vans, a team of skilled plumbers, and a reputation for being honest and reliable. They went to the best private schools, wore designer clothes, and never once had to worry about a bill. When they were old enough, they each got a brand new car for their 16th birthday. Their university tuition was paid in full, as was the rent on their stylish downtown apartments. I gave them the world, or at least my small, hardworking corner of it. For a long time, it felt right. They were happy, and their happiness was my purpose. It started with small things, little comments that pricked at my pride like tiny thorns. I remember picking Olivia up from her prestigious high school once. My usual truck was in the shop, so I was in one of the work vans, still in my dusty work clothes. When she came out with her friends, I saw a flicker of embarrassment in her eyes. She rushed into the van, ducking her head, and said, "Dad, can you please park around the corner next time?" I asked why, and she just mumbled, "You know." The van I didn't impress it. I told myself she was just a teenager, concerned with appearances another time. During a parent-teacher conference for Isabella, her history teacher was praising her ambition to become a lawyer. He turned to me, smiled, and asked what I did for a living. Before I could answer, Isabella jumped in. "My dad is in property management," she said quickly. It wasn't a lie. Exactly, I owned the building our office was in, but it was a deliberate, calculated omission. It was a clear effort to sand down the rough, blue-collar edges of her father, the plumber. On the drive home, I asked her why she'd said that. "It's just easier, Dad," she'd said, staring out the window. "People don't get it." You know, I did know. I knew she thought it was something to be ashamed of. These moments began to accumulate, forming a quiet, heavy ledger of disrespect in my heart. There were the times they'd wrinkle their noses if I came to the dinner table without scrubbing my hands raw, even though they were perfectly clean. There were the jokes about me smelling like drains or having pipe gunk under my fingernails, which were always meticulously filed and cleaned. I was the man who funded their world, yet I was becoming a dirty little secret within it. They loved the life my work gave them, but they were ashamed of the work itself, and they were ashamed of me. I ignored it all. My promise to Maria. I imagined her smiling. I let them believe that the money that funded their lives appeared magically. Without sweat, without dirt, without a father who spent his days on his knees fixing the very filth they so despised. I enabled their delusion, and in doing so, I set the stage for the night. It would all come crashing down. The evening that broke our family began. Isabella was nearing the end of law school, and Olivia had just secured a competitive internship with a top marketing firm. I was immensely proud of them, and I wanted to treat them. I booked a table at an upscale Italian restaurant downtown, the kind of place with white tablecloths, sparkling chandeliers, and waiters who call you sir. I arrived early, dressed in my best suit. I felt a little out of place, a man more comfortable with a wrench in his hand than a linen napkin in his lap. But I wanted to make the night special. My daughters arrived a few minutes later, each with their respective boyfriends, two young men named Alex and Ben. They were nice enough, both from wealthy families and pursuing careers in finance. They looked the part, dressed in fashionable, expensive clothes that made my simple suit feel even more inadequate. "The sentiment, you really outdid yourself, Frank," she said, using my first name, as she often did, when she was trying to sound mature and sophisticated. It always felt less like a term of endearment and more like a subtle demotion. We settled in, and the initial conversation was light and pleasant. They talked about their classes, their friends, and their plans for the future. I mostly listened, content to be in their presence, to see them happy. I ordered a bottle of expensive wine, and we all toasted to their success. For a brief moment, it felt like a family. I felt like a father. The shift happened when Alex, Isabella's boyfriend, turned his attention to me. He was a polite young man, and his question was genuine. "So, Frank," he started, "Isabella says you're in business, but she's always a bit vague. About it? What is it that you do, exactly?" A sudden, tense silence fell over the table. I saw Isabella shoot him a sharp, warning glance. I opened my mouth to answer, to say with the pride my own father had instilled in me, "I own a plumbing company." But Isabella cut me off before I could speak. "My father is an entrepreneur," she said, her voice a little too loud, a little too bright. "He runs a service-based company, very successful." Alex nodded, intrigued. "Oh, that's great. What kind of service?" I saw the panic in my daughter's eyes. They exchanged a look, a silent and desperate communication. It was Olivia who spoke up, this time with a nervous little laugh. "It's, home maintenance. Very specialized." They were doing it again, right in front of me. They were dancing around the word, dressing it up in fancy language to make it palatable for their high society boyfriends. I was tired of the dancing. I was tired of the shame. "I'm a plumber," I said, my voice calm but firm, cutting through their pretense. "I own Valenti & Son Plumbing. It was my father's business and his father's before him. We fix pipes, install water heaters, and clear drains." I looked directly at my daughters. As I said it, their faces flushed with color, a mixture of anger and embarrassment. Alex and Ben, to their credit, looked unfazed. "Wow, a family business." "That's really impressive," Ben said, nodding respectfully. "Must be great to be your own boss." But my daughters couldn't let it go. Their embarrassment was curdling into cruelty. Isabella let out a short, sharp laugh, dripping with disdain. "Well, impressive is one word for it," she said, swirling the wine in her glass. She looked at Alex, a smirk playing on her lips. "He's being modest. He's just a plumber who gets his hands in people's filth all day." Olivia, not to be outdone by her older sister, chimed in, her voice mocking. "Seriously? Can you imagine? All the gross stuff he has to see. He comes home smelling like a sewer half the time. We used to have to beg him to take his boots off outside." They weren't just ashamed. They were actively mocking me. They were painting me as a caricature, a dirty, bumbling tradesman for the amusement of their boyfriends. All the years of their subtle disrespect, the quiet embarrassments, the deliberate omissions, it all coalesced into this single ugly moment of public humiliation. I looked at their smiling, beautiful faces, the faces I had cherished and worked my entire life to support, and I felt nothing but a cold, hollowing emptiness. They weren't just insulting my job. They were insulting the very foundation of their own lives. The food on their plates, the clothes on their backs, the tuition for the law degree that made Isabella feel so superior was all paid for by the filth. They found so amusing, I didn't say a word. I simply placed my napkin on the table, stood up, and pulled out my wallet. I dropped enough cash to cover the entire meal and a generous tip on the table. "Dad, what are you doing?" Olivia asked, her laughter finally dying in her throat as she saw the look on my face. I looked at them one last time, my two daughters, and I saw them for what they had become. Strangers. "I'm done," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Enjoy your meal." I turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving them sitting in stunned silence. The cool night air hit my face, but it couldn't touch the frozen block of ice that had formed in my chest. Driving home, the city lights blurred through the tears I refused to let fall. It's a promise I had made to Maria was to give them a good life, but I realized with devastating clarity that in the process, I had allowed them to become horrible people. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it couldn't go on. The lesson they needed wasn't one I could teach with words. It had to be taught with consequences. The drive home was a blur of traffic lights and street lamps. I walked into the house I had built for my family, and the silence was deafening. Every object seemed to mock me. The photos on the mantelpiece showed 2 smiling little girls with missing teeth clinging to my legs. There was the family portrait we'd taken just a year after Maria passed. The 3 of us huddled together, trying to project a sense of wholeness we didn't feel. I ran my hand over a framed picture of Maria, her smile so warm it could melt a glacier. "Oh, Maria," I whispered to the empty room. "What have I done?" I sank onto the sofa, the fine suit I'd worn to the restaurant feeling like a costume. Pride I had felt just a few hours earlier had curdled into a bitter cocktail of rage and profound sadness. My daughter's laughter, sharp and condescending, echoed in my mind. Just a plumber, people's filth. The words were like shards of glass working their way into my heart. For hours, I just sat there, replaying not just the dinner, but the last decade of my life. I thought about the sacrifices. The time I missed Olivia's school play because a restaurant's main sewer line had backed up on a Friday night, threatening to shut them down for the whole weekend. I worked through the night, knee-deep in muck, so another man's business wouldn't fail. I got home just as the sun was rising, exhausted and sore, and found a note from Olivia saying she was so disappointed. I wasn't there. I remembered the time Isabella wanted to go on a school trip to Europe. It cost thousands of dollars. I didn't have just sitting around, so I took on a massive commercial repiping job, working 16-hour days for 3 weeks straight, my body aching in ways I didn't know it could. I handed her the check, and she barely looked up from her phone. Just said, "Thanks, Dad," before rushing off to tell her friends. I had been a hero in my own mind, a father providing for his child. To her, I was just a walking, talking ATM. When had I become nothing more than a source of funds? When did my identity as their father get stripped away, leaving only my function as their provider? As I sat in the dark, the painful truth began to settle in. This wasn't their fault alone. It was mine to dot in my desperate attempt to shield them from the hardships I had known. I had deprived them of something essential: perspective. They had never known struggle, so they couldn't appreciate the fruits of it. They had never seen me truly exhausted after a long day, only the clean, pressed version who took them out for dinner. They had never had to work for anything, so they didn't understand the value of my work, or of any work, for that matter. I hadn't just given them a comfortable life, I had built them a gilded cage of entitlement, and they had become its prisoners. My promise to Maria had been to give them everything. But what did everything mean? Did it mean new cars and expensive apartments? Or did it mean character, integrity, humility, and respect? I had focused so much on the material that I had completely failed to instill the moral. Their disrespect, for me, was a symptom of a much deeper disease, a complete lack of gratitude and a profound sense of superiority that they had done nothing to earn. The anger began to subside, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. Continuing down this path would be the ultimate betrayal of my role as a father. To let them continue to mock the very foundation that held them up would be to fail them in the most fundamental way. They didn't need another gift. They didn't need another check. They needed a lesson, a hard, painful lesson in the reality of the world they claimed to be so ready for. I stood up and walked to my office. I turned on the desk lamp, and the small pool of light felt like a spotlight on my new purpose. The hurt was still there, a deep, throbbing ache in my chest. But for the first time in years, I felt a sense of control. I was no longer going to be a passive participant in my own humiliation. I pulled out a notepad and a pen. The pen felt familiar in my hand, more natural than the wine glass at the restaurant. I began to make a list. It wasn't a list of grievances or angry words. It was a list of actions, methodical, precise, final. Each item I wrote down was a cord I was preparing to cut, a financial lifeline that had become a chain of disrespect. The university birth, the apartment leasing office, the auto insurance company, my financial advisor. With each word I wrote, I felt a piece of the heavy burden lift. This wasn't about revenge. I knew in my heart that seeing them suffer would bring me no joy. This was about respect. Not their respect for my feared. That was a bridge too far burned, but about forcing them to respect the connection between work and life. I couldn't make them love me. I couldn't make them admire my profession. But I could, and I would. Make them understand that the filth I handled every day was the very substance that had kept their pristine world spinning. The lesson was going to be severe, but their disease was advanced. The only cure was a shock to the system. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, but I didn't head out to a job site. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a fresh pot of coffee and the list I had made the night before. The emotional turmoil of the previous evening had settled into a quiet, steely determination. There was no anger left, only the clarity of a necessary, albeit painful task. I was a plumber about to shut off the main valve. My first call was at 9 a.m. sharp to the financial aid office of Isabella's prestigious law school. I spoke to a polite but bureaucratic woman. "Good morning," I said, my voice even. "My name is Frank Valenti. I'm calling about my daughter, Isabella Valenti. I am the guarantor on her tuition payments, and I need to inform you that I will no longer be making them, effective immediately." There was a pause on the other end. "Sir, the semester is already underway. There's a significant outstanding balance." "I am aware of that," I replied. "Isabella is 24 years old. The responsibility for that balance is now hers. Please direct all future correspondence to her." I gave the administrator Isabella's contact information and politely ended the call. One cord cut. Next. I called the leasing office of the luxury apartment building where both my daughters lived in separate units. I had co-signed both leases and set up an automatic payment from my business account to cover their rent each month. I got the building manager on the phone. "This is Frank Valenti," I began. "I am the guarantor for apartments 12A, Olivia Valenti, and 15B, Isabella Valenti. I am officially notifying you that as of the end of this month, I will no longer be covering the rental payments. Please be aware that their leases will be solely their responsibility going forward." The manager was audibly flustered. "Mr. Valenti, these are premium units. The rent is substantial. Are you sure?" "I am positive," I said. "They are both of legal age and are now responsible for their own housing. Thank you for your time." 2 cords cut. The third call was to the insurance company that held the policies on their 2 new cars, a sporty coupe for Isabella and a stylish SUV for Olivia. Both were registered in my name. I was not just the policyholder, I was the owner. I explained that I would be taking possession of the vehicles and that the policies for their designated drivers should be canceled. Buildings garaged the next day and delivered to my home. 3 cords cut. My final call was the most significant. I phoned my financial advisor, a man who had helped me manage my investments for years. I had 2 substantial trust funds set up, one for each daughter, intended as down payments for their first homes. It was their inheritance, the culmination of my life's work. "George, it's Frank," I said when he answered. "Frank, how are you?" "I need to make some changes," I said, getting straight to the point. "I want to dissolve the trust funds I set up for Isabella and Olivia." There was a stunned silence. George knew my family history. He knew how much those funds meant to me. "Everything is finally becoming all right," I said. "Please, liquidate the assets. I want to roll that money into my own retirement fund and set up a new charitable donation in my late wife's name. The girls are on their own." I could hear the concern in his voice, but he knew me well enough not to argue. He simply said, "I'll drop the paperwork, Frank." The final cord was cut. With the calls made, there was only one thing left to do. I didn't want the news to come from a collections agent or a landlord. It had to come from me. I sat down and composed a short, simple email. I wrote one, then deleted it. It was too angry. I wrote another. It was too sad. Finally, I settled on a tone that was neutral and factual, as cold and clear as the water in a brand new copper pipe. I sent it to both of them simultaneously. Subject: Important information regarding your finances, Isabella and Olivia. Following the events of last night, I have been forced to reevaluate the financial support I provide to you, which your comments made it clear that you have a deep disdain for my profession, and by extension, for me. You are ashamed of the work that has funded the very lifestyle you enjoy. As you are both adults, it is time for you to take on the responsibilities that come with that. Effective immediately, I will no longer be paying your university tuition or your rent. The cars you have been driving, which are registered in my name, will be repossessed tomorrow. This is not a punishment. It is a natural consequence. I hope this experience. Stared at the word dad for a long time before I hit send. It felt like a lie. I wasn't their dad anymore. Not in the way that mattered. I was just the man who had signed the checks. As I clicked the button, I didn't feel relief or satisfaction. I just felt an immense, echoing quiet. The machine I had built to support their lives had been switched off. Now, all I could do was wait for the silence to be broken. The silence lasted for exactly 57 minutes. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A violent, angry sound. It was Isabella. I let it go to voicemail. A second later, it buzzed again. Olivia. I let that go too. Then came the text messages, a digital avalanche of shock and fury. The first was from Isabella. What did you do? I just got an email from the university. This isn't funny. A minute later, from Olivia, my credit card was just declined buying coffee. A joke is a joke, Dad, but this is insane. Call me now, then Isabella again, her tone shifting from confusion to outrage. They're going to kick me out of law school, my entire future. You would ruin my life over one stupid comment. Olivia's followed. I'm calling the police. You can't just steal my car. It's mine. I read the messages with a strange sense of detachment. It was like watching a film of a disaster. I knew was coming. Their words were filled with panic, entitlement, and indignation. But in the dozens of messages that flooded my phone over the next few hours, 2 words were conspicuously absent. I'm sorry. There was no reflection, no remorse, no acknowledgement of the hurt they had caused. Their only concern was for the sudden disruption of their comfortable lives. They weren't upset that they had wounded their father. They were furious that the bank had closed. Each frantic, selfish message served only to pour concrete on the foundation of my decision. I had done the right thing. I turned my phone on silent and went about my day. I drove to the office, reviewed blueprints for a new commercial contract, and spoke with my crew. The familiar routines of my work were a comfort. The smell of copper and PVC, the heft of a pipe wrench in my hand, this was my world. It was real. It was honest. It didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. It was the world my daughters had. Rejected, and I found a quiet solace in it. Later that afternoon, my sister Alina called. She was the only other family I had left. Frank, what is going on? She asked, her voice tight with worry. I just got off the phone with an absolutely hysterical Isabella. She's saying you've cut them off completely. She said you're kicking them out of their apartments and taking their cars. I took a deep breath. It's all true, Alina. For God's sake. Why? She exclaimed. They're your children. So I told her. I recounted the dinner in detail, the exact words they used, the shame they so clearly felt for me and for the work that had given them everything. I spoke calmly and without emotion, laying out the facts like I would explain a plumbing issue to a client. When I finished, Alina was quiet for a long moment. She had seen hints of it over the years too, but had always dismissed it as teenage arrogance. My goodness, Frank, she finally said, her voice soft. I didn't realize it had gotten that bad. People's filth, that's just cruel. It's more than cruel, Alina. It's a fundamental lack of character, I said, and I have to take responsibility for my part in creating it. I can't fix it by writing another check. She sighed. So, what happens now? Now, they learn, I said. They learn what it means to earn a living. They learn what things actually cost. They learn that life isn't a free ride funded by a man they're embarrassed by. The next day, as scheduled, the tow truck arrived at my house with the 2 cars. Isabella's sleek black coupe and Olivia's pristine white SUV looked absurdly out of place, parked in my modest driveway. Seeing them there, inert and driverless, felt symbolic. They were beautiful, expensive shells, just like the lives my daughters had been living. I had the cars professionally cleaned and detailed. Then I listed them both for sale online. They sold within a week for a fair price. I took the money and put it right back into the business. The voicemails kept coming. Their tone began to change. The initial rage gave way to panicked pleading, and then to a strange, hollow sort of bargaining. Dad, okay, I get it, Isabella said in one message, her voice strained. You're angry. I'd be angry too. What you did was a real wake-up call. So, point taken, lesson learned. Can we please just talk about a solution now? Maybe a payment plan for tuition. A solution, not an apology. She saw this as a negotiation, a problem to be solved so she could get back to her life. She hadn't learned a thing. The fallout was messy, but my resolve never wavered. I was a man who understood pressure. I dealt with pipes that were fit to burst every single day. I knew how to hold firm against a tide of filth. This was no different. My daughters had created this pressure, this toxic backup in our family line, and I was the only one who knew how to shut it down and clean it out. A week after the email, they showed up at my house. It was a Sunday evening, and I was in the living room reading a book when the doorbell rang. I knew it was them before I even got up. They wouldn't have called first. Calling would have been a request, and they were past the point of asking for permission. I opened the door, and there they were on my front step, looking disheveled and worn. Olivia's eyes were red from crying, and Isabella had a hard, defiant look on her face, a mask for the panic underneath. They had likely been evicted, or were on the verge of it. The reality of their situation had clearly set in. "We need to talk," Isabella said, pushing past me into the house. Olivia followed meekly behind her. I closed the door and turned to face them. I didn't offer them a seat. I just waited. "This has gone on long enough," Isabella began, her voice trembling with a fury she was trying to keep in check. "This isn't a lesson. This is a nuclear bomb. You've destroyed our lives. My law school dean wants to see me tomorrow to discuss my financial insolvency. Olivia had to sell her laptop to make rent. Is this what you wanted?" "What I wanted," I said, my voice quiet and steady, was for my daughters to show me a shred of respect. What I wanted was for them to not be disgusted by the man who gave them everything. "It was a joke," Olivia burst out, tears welling in her eyes again. "A stupid, stupid joke. We were just trying to be funny for our boyfriends. We didn't mean it, didn't you, Olivia?" I asked, looking directly at her. "Tell me you didn't mean it when you were embarrassed to be seen in my work van. Tell me Isabella didn't mean it when she told her teacher I was in property management. This wasn't one joke. This was the one time you were careless enough to say what you really think." Out loud, Isabella stepped forward, changing tactics. The anger receded, replaced by a calculated performance of remorse. "Okay, you're right," she said, her voice softening. "We've been terrible. We've been ungrateful and spoiled, and we are so sorry." She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "We are deeply, truly sorry for what we said and for how we've treated you. We love you, Dad. Please. We've learned our lesson. Can this be over now?" It was a good performance. She sounded sincere. She used the right words, but as I looked into her eyes, I saw no genuine regret. I saw a law student making a closing argument, trying to sway the jury. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry for the consequences. "I have a question for you, Isabella," I said. "Let's say I agree. I turn the money back on pay for your school, your apartment, your car. What happens in 5 years? When you're a successful lawyer and your fancy firm has a bring your family to work day, do you introduce me? Do you say, 'Everyone, this is my father, Frank, he's a plumber'? Or do you ask me to stay home?" She flinched as if I'd slapped her. The question hung in the air, thick and uncomfortable, because we both knew the answer. She would be ashamed. She would always be ashamed. "That's not fair," she whispered. "It's the most fair question in the world," I replied. "Your apology isn't about respect. It's about logistics. You need my money to continue living the life you want, a life where you can keep me at a comfortable distance. The filth is fine as long as it's funding your clean, sophisticated world from afar." I walked over to the small table by the door. Where I kept my keys, I picked up the 2 sets of car keys I had taken from them. I held them out. "This is what this is about," I said. "This isn't about my feelings. It's about your character. You don't have any. You are 24 and 21 years old. You are no longer my children to raise. You are adults who have shown me who you are, and I believe you." Olivia started to sob, a raw, desperate sound. "Please, Daddy, don't do this. We'll do anything. We'll get jobs. We'll pay you back. Just don't do this." The word Daddy was a knife in my gut. It was a word she hadn't used in years, a calculated regression to a time when she could get what she wanted with tears. "The time for that is over," I said, my voice hardening. The sadness was being replaced by a final, resolute anger. A father who adored you, who would have done anything for you, and you mocked him. You threw him away because he wasn't good enough for your new, important lives. So now, you get to live those lives without him. You want to be independent, sophisticated adults? Here's your chance. I opened the front door. It's time for you to leave my house. Isabella stared at me, her face pale with shock and disbelief. The mask was gone. All that was left was raw, sputtering rage. You will regret this, she spat. When you're old and alone, you will regret this. No, I said, looking her straight in the eye. I'm already old, and I've been alone for years. They stood there for another moment, hoping for a crack in my resolve, but they found none. Finally, defeated, they walked out the door. Isabella with her head held high in defiance, Olivia hunched over in tears. I watched them walk down the path and get into a taxi they must have kept waiting at the curb. I closed the door, leaned against it, and let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 10 years. It was over. It was truly over. That followed were the quietest of my life. The house, which had always felt empty without Maria, now held a new, more profound kind of silence. There were no more angry voicemails, no more desperate texts, no more drama. There was just peace. A sad, heavy peace, but peace nonetheless. My sister Alina served as a reluctant source of information. At first, she tried to mediate, to convince me to soften my stance. But after a few conversations where I calmly explained my position, she began to understand. She didn't fully agree, but she respected the decision. Through her, I heard bits and pieces about the girls' new lives. Isabella had, as I predicted, been forced to drop out of law school. The debt was too high, and without my income as a guarantor, no bank would give her a loan. She was working as a waitress in a diner, the same kind of job she would have sneered at just a year before. Olivia had also withdrawn from her marketing program. She was sharing a tiny apartment with 3 other roommates on the far side of town and working 2 retail jobs to make ends meet. They were, for the first time in their lives, struggling. There was a part of me, a small, stubborn, fatherly instinct, that felt a pang of guilt. But it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of rightness. I didn't revel in their hardship, but I recognized its necessity. They were finally learning the lesson I had failed to teach them. Life is hard, money is earned, respect is not a given. They were living the consequences of their own choices, and for the first time, their lives were real. As for me, I found a new sense of purpose in my own life. For 2 decades, my entire identity had been wrapped up in being a father, a provider. With that stripped away, I had to figure out who Frank Valenti was on his own. I started by investing more of myself into the business, not just my time, but my passion. I took on a young apprentice, a bright kid from a rough neighborhood named Leo. He was eager to learn, his eyes wide with respect every time I showed him how to sweat a joint or diagnose a complex pressure issue. He saw the trade not as filth, but as a skill, an art. In him, I saw myself, and I saw my father. I was passing something on again, but this time it felt earned. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected, went fishing on weekends, and even took a vacation, my first in over 15 years. I went to Italy, to the small village my grandfather had come from. I walked the old streets, ate the food, and felt a connection to my roots, to the long line of hardworking men I came from. I realized my pride in my work wasn't just about me, it was about honoring them. One evening, about a year after the confrontation, I received a letter. It was from Olivia. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. It was a short, handwritten note. "Dear Dad," it began. "I don't know if you'll even read this. I know I don't deserve it. This past year has been the hardest of my life. I've been tired and scared, and I've had to do things I never thought I would. I've had to clean toilets at one of my jobs, and I thought of you. I thought about how you did hard, dirty work every single day for over 20 years to make sure I never had to, and I was ashamed of you for it. That thought is the most disgusting filth I can imagine. I am so sorry. Not because I want your money. I don't want a single cent. I just wanted to say that I'm sorry for being such a horrible daughter. I hope one day you can be happy, Olivia." I read the letter 3 times. The apology felt genuine. It was born of experience, not desperation. It was the apology I had longed to hear. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer with the pictures of Maria. Sense of closure, But it didn't change my decision. The damage was too deep, the trust too broken. Acknowledging the wound doesn't heal it. I was happy she was learning, but her classroom was the world now, not my home. I had lost my daughters, but they were finally on the path to becoming decent human beings. Perhaps that was the last, most painful act of fatherhood I could offer. Sometimes, I sit in my quiet house and wonder if I did the right thing. The loneliness can be a heavy blanket. But then I remember the look of contempt on their faces in that restaurant, and I know I did. I chose my self-respect. I chose the honor of my father and his father before him. I taught my daughters the hardest lesson of their lives. So I have to ask you, the audience, what would you have done? Was I too harsh? Or was I a father, finally? Doing his job? After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories. We are all human. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon.